independence upon such special points, right? Where we left off?
Yes.
The
Yes.
definitive great scholar Nosan Gyatso. And was it mentioned last time that Nosan Gyatso wrote that spectacular book about highest yoga tantra that Gavin Kilty translated, and for which he was given an award for his translation. What's it called? Anyway,
Ornament of stainless light.
yeah, ornament of
Chakra.
ornament of stainless light. Gavin's a fabulous guy. He was in South India just recently. I made fun of him. I said at one point in public, I guess while I was giving my talk, my short talk, among the 30 who gave, I guess I was the first of the 30 who gave short 20-minute talks. And I said I was the oldest, and I said he may look like the oldest, but he's something like that, but he's not the oldest. His hair is entirely white. Got a tiny bit of gray. He's a very fine person. He, he taught one Taiwanese fellow, Patrick Lin, Tibetan, really brought his Tibetan up to snuff. And he said to Patrick, your Tibetan is way behind everybody else's. And by the time Gavin taught him a single course, Gavin said he was way ahead of everybody else. And Patrick is one of our 14 translators. We actually have 9 or 10 who are working at any one time. Patrick's a professional translator into Chinese, originally just English into Chinese, but now Tibetan into Chinese or English, Chinese and English, and still is attempting to live based on his translating of Chinese into English. So Nosan Gyatso, this fabulously great scholar of course, Tibetan Buddhism, is renowned to have said, whatever is an established base, whatever exists, is a compounded phenomenon. So Thupten Yangsal, right? Sent a question by email. You see, causes and conditions, or compounded, has a very wide meaning. It can mean basis of imputation, basis of designation. It can mean the imputing consciousness. So, if, as Jang-kya Röl-pay-dor-jay below says, uses causes and conditions in this very wide way, causes and conditions can mean the parts of an object. He takes an expansive view of something that is it Chandrakirti or Tsongkhapa or both. He takes a very expansive view. She sent me a question by email on which I spent a bit of time this morning trying to tie down what exactly Tsongkhapa said, what exactly Jang-kya Röl-pay-dor-jay is adding, and we'll get to it this time or next time. And so when whatever exists is a compounded phenomenon, then some neophyte who, doesn't know the depth to which Nosan Gyatso is referring could pipe up and say, "Oh, you're a jerk. What are you going to say about uncompounded space? Are you going to say, it's compounded? You're a jerk. I'm not even going to wait for your response." So it's compounded because everything has parts. And everything depends upon an imputing consciousness, etc., etc. And so Jang-kya unloads on such neophytes. So that's the rest of what he says. And then Jang-kya Röl-pay-dor-jay. And of course, what keeps appearing to my mind is the person that I think is his reincarnation, who was in the anteroom. I think it's called anteroom, while we were eating dinner, and I was so tired I didn't bother to go out and meet him. Even persons pained by karma, for persons pained by karma, even medicine given to them becomes poison. They can't even take medicine. As one Tibetan doctor said of me, that pepper stimulates digestive, black pepper, digestive fluid. So she said, "You're somebody who can't even take black pepper." I said, "Yes." So you can't even take that medicine. And of course, with any medicine, there comes to be a point where even it will do you in. That's in, books on dying. The doctors give up on you because the medicines that they give you will hasten your death. But my medicines I take for excessive stomach acid are still working for me, although I have to take double and triple the quantities. So then Jang-kya, as is often the case, John Shiva does the same thing, puts forth an advertisement for himself. And in a few lines into this, he says, "It appears that others have not explained these points clearly, but I've explained a little." Which is, he's at once glorifying his exposition and then being humble about it. I've just explained a tiny bit, which is means I've explained quite a bit. It's pretty good. I'm only being humble. So, in the coming out to the margin, we have Hopkins speaking, because not the real young Hopkins, but maybe late medium. All three types of, I complain this morning about types of. Why not just say all three dependent arisings? Just drop types of. Type makes it a little bit too distinct, you see. Can be seen to have the same profound import. Answering Tutin children, and probably answering a whole lot of contemporary Tibetan scholars who want to attach the most profound meaning to only the third one. You know, her question was, I assume, coming from the scholars that all of us who have listened directly from Tibetan scholars, so, you know, a lot of them say, well, it's just the third one. So here's those who say, no, it's not just the third. There's a way of explaining him, so it's just the third, but it's all of them. The Serje scholar Sesho Losang Punso. Sesho Losang Punso is really fantastic. He's, you know, got fantastic commentary, his notes on Tsongkhapa's Essence of Eloquence. Who doesn't just, you know, he's one of those who doesn't just raise the flag of his own college's textbooks, but is very, very broad, much like Jigme Tamsha Gyatso, who, as I remember, also, well, when he uses the word, the phrase, the textbooks, as I remember, he's referring to Jansheva's textbooks, but one of his great teachers was Ganden Chiba, throne holder of Ganden, who was Serje. So whether he's really Serje or Gomang's a big question. There's a story that I was told of Gomang scholars who went to debate against him because he blends. Not against Sesho Losang Punso, but Jime Tamsha Gyatso. But then they didn't get to debate. So he criticizes Dendal Haramba. This is the Gomang scholar, the Mongolian, who smoked a pipe and would hang his pipe on the strand of smoke in his tent. That's kind of cool. I'd say, oh yeah, okay, you can do that. That's not going to make me follow you. Criticizes Dendal Haramba for positing in his commentary on the Praise of Dependent Arising, which is also called the lesser essence of eloquence. The subtle one, the likes, and why it's called the likes. In Tibetan, that's tabu. The likes of the dependent arising, that is the mere positing by names and conceptuality. The subtle one. So it posits as that, the dependent arising that goes as the meaning, well, this one as the subtle one, that goes as the meaning of emptiness, you know, narrowing it down to just one of them. For, and it should say, Sershol, not he, thinks it also can be taken. You see, Sershol's view is broad, and Hopkins' late medium, wrote this sentence, poorly. Seychelles thinks it also can be taken to be the dependent arising, that is, production and dependence upon causes and conditions. You see, Seychelles doesn't narrow it down to the first one. Seychelles takes it to be all three. Otherwise, what was said earlier doesn't make sense. Seychelles points to the facts that, and this has to be why I've said that what this is supports what I've said earlier. And it has to be why I'm not an independent thinker. I'm being modest, but showing off at the same time. So, see here, what they're talking about is internal and external things are dependent arisings contingent on causes. So, Songkwan himself says, dependent on causes, and this isn't taken widely because Songkwan himself specifies that he's talking about internal and external things. Internal and external. External being not the roots of the hair, but external even being hair. Now, of course, that includes the clicker, which, when my computer came back on, wouldn't work to turn on my nice 65, is it? 65-inch, whatever it is, 60-inch, no, 55-inch or 50-inch monitor. Wouldn't work anymore. That took time. That's external. Well, of course. But then, some of this stuff, you might think hair was internal. No, it's not conjoined with feeling. Well, nowadays we want to make trouble for these dumb Buddhists and say, well, what about your brain? They can cut open your skull, go inside your brain, and you don't say ouch. Say that. Take that. Take that, you dumb Buddhists. So, unless we want to posit some very subtle feeling that we can't provide evidence for yet, and just hang on to that. We say, yes, there are all sorts of things inside, like now I have to compare the shit that's in my bowels, compare the inside of the brain with shit. That doesn't seem so good. Okay, but sometimes I don't want to jump too quickly on scientific, current scientific evidence. Because there are, for instance, there are channels with moving substances in the body that cease, have scientifically been found, that weren't known when I was in the monastery in, 1960s. So there are movements of fluids that create their own channels that have been scientifically, by current science, discovered. I forget what year discovered. And those channels disappear. I don't think it has to be a death. But, last for certain periods of time, and they're here and then go away. And that, seminal fluid is the composition of seminal fluid, that there are contributions to it from various parts of the body that are, protein has so many meanings, and it comes from places in the body for both male, so-called seminal, for both male and female, that little buggies that come out in it weren't known isn't the whole story. So whether there's some there may be more room for some so-called ancient science as being fact, despite its not knowing about the little swimming things, which is a big hole in Buddhist ancient science, admittedly, may need to be taken account of. Okay. So, I don't know why that is relevant here. Oh, inner and outer, external and internal things. So, he's got a good quote there, Sershul. Because of asserting in accordance with the second one, of arising dependence upon causes and conditions, here not having a vast meaning, as the meaning of the emptiness of inherently existent production. Meaning of emptiness. And then this quote. That which rely on those which rely, the third line, cause conditions said by the conqueror to be empty, are said to be empty, and the meaning that doesn't depend on what's in brackets. The source of the brackets must be indicated by the note. One who knows the emptiness is conscientious. Pyre, Bakyur, in Tibetan. I should say in Tibetan first, so that those who don't know Tibetan will be turned off, warned to be turned off, or just put it in, say, oh, he's going to say something for our predispositions. Conscientious in Tibetan is Pyre, also pronounced Bakyur, at overcoming the unpeacefulness of the afflicted emotions.
Cafe?
Yes.
I asked. If we go to point 1,
Yes.
quotation from God, there's ever realize that what is does not rely on it. What does another mean there?
For such performance in the middle of the they, and as part of that awareness, will understand this is meaning. Things have to inherently exist because they've realized that what is inherently established does not rely on something other. Well, up above it said causes.
Hmm. Yeah, but here they're trying to show the expansive.
No, that's not his point. That's not Serchel's point. Because, let's see, internal and external things means dependent arising on, shall we say, old-fashioned causes? Causes that produce. So the causes being spoken about here are limited to causes that produce.
Oh.
Okay? Well, sorry, I don't want to force. It's like my old lama who says Jigsaw, and I have to say Jigsaw. There's no reason for me to pull that out of you. Yeah. Yeah, and I said, yeah. I say it to myself. Yeah, it's just something I say. So, now above, Jang-kya cited a passage, remember? And the late medium Hopkins said, below we'll discuss this threefold exposition of dependent arising is also the assertion of the glorious Chandrakirti. So let's go in, and now I'm saying we've finally gotten to this. And I was wondering as if this is, if we looked in Jang-kya, is it right after? Have we, where does this come? Is it somewhere, is it right next to what we just finished? Or does it come later? Oh, it's in the it's the 4 interwoven annotations. Okay. That's cool. It's not Jang-kya. And when I was reading this, my mind was very bright, or brighter than later. And I found, when I compared to when I was reading it later, that I didn't pay attention to the brackets. And I read everything very smoothly as if the brackets weren't there. And it read very nicely. And later, after a nap and so forth, and searching for some stuff and getting the monitor going again. I was tired, and I began paying attention to the brackets as if I wanted to make sure I knew that this was bracketed material from somebody else. And that ruined the reading. And it reminded me that when I began working on Tsongkhapa's Great Exposition of the Stages of the Path, I decided not to use brackets, and instead colorized. I made the additions from Jayasheba, which was the headings, yellow, because his book is called Golden something. And I made Datikesha Rinchen Tundrup's aqua. So that my hope was, because they weren't brackets, that one could just flow. I hoped. Without the square brackets. And I also hoped that people could select the material, and get rid of with one fell swoop, get rid of the highlighting if they wanted to. Put it in a different document. A lot easier than brackets. Because the aim of putting in the bracketed material is to read it as if the brackets weren't there. And I had this very nice experience when I began reading this of not noticing the brackets. And it was really fluid. And before this section, I say, well, it's very turgid. And I found it to be totally non-turgid. And I thought, why? Why am I advertising that it's turgid? It's not turgid. And it's because when I came back to it later when I was tired, a little bit tired, I was noticing brackets as if there was some virtue. If you want to read it without brackets, I believe it's later in the book without brackets, or at least I provided it when I did the Tsongkhapa material in the Great Exposition Stages of the Path. I did it without. But then it's so without bracketed material, it's hard to understand. Anyway, now, the beginning part of it says that Tsongkhapa uses some of the same vocabulary for the object of negation. He uses the same material to talk about the conventional meaning of nature. What is the nature of red pepper? It stings your tongue. You see? What's the nature? He uses some of the same vocabulary for both conventional meanings and to refer to the object of negation. And the point is, that creates some confusion. But that's how it is in India. The term own being or nature, inherent, well, what I try to make it easy for the reader, when it means the object of negation, I'll say inherent existence. When it just means the nature of fire is it's burning. What's the nature of water? It's wet and moistening. But you see, we're not so lucky as to, to have somebody who clobbers you with the particular meaning. The aircon just went on. Don't need it downstairs. Clobbers you, makes it easy for you. So in general, in the text of Chandrakirti, there appear to be many uses of conventions. You see the word convention means the words, such as nature, own entity. Notice that in Sanskrit, this word rangingo is swarupa, own form. That's one of the ways of saying it. Swabhava, or own, swabhava, own being, own entity. It is, interestingly enough, own form, rupa, for those interested in Sanskrit, and so forth. Even for mere conventionalities, objects that actually are mere conventionalities. And then it's sort of, if that bracket wasn't there, you just read it. When indicating the conventional mode of abiding of things, as in the nature of a thing and the entity of a thing, and it would really help if, what's the nature of water? It's wet and moistening. What's the nature of fire? It's hot and burning. What's the nature of wind? It's light and moving. And unfortunately, the source of the added material doesn't say that. Here on the occasion of the object of negation, the mention of nature, and you're given the Tibetan and the Sanskrit, and so forth, are not like this. Rather, and you just forget about the bracket. This is not Hopkins here. Hopkins is not the source. If it's Hopkins, there's a note now. There's a note in this material. Somewhere up in the note it just said where it's coming from. The existence in objects, whether persons or phenomena, and the note, here's Hopkins piping up in the note, phenomena means other phenomena, because persons are phenomena, so phenomena has to mean other phenomena, phenomena other than persons. A mode of subsistence, or a mode of abiding. Different words in Tibetan. In Tibetan it's neluk, and the second one is durluk, durluk. And some people like to translate neluk as abiding, and I can understand that. But then what are you going to use for durluk? Staying, a mode of staying, you could say. But staying, is... So I chose subsistence. But as I've said many times, subsistence is not like merely getting by. It's the same as abiding. And I really appreciate that many translators want to do the first one, which in Tibetan is neluk, as mode of abiding, because that's a lot perhaps easier than subsistence, But I had to get two different words, because I take on my transmission that I've got to get a different word for everything. And I won't mind it if you say, Jeffrey, you said you were going to get a different word for every single Tibetan word, but it looks as if you didn't here or there. And then you'll prompt me to, and I'll think, oh yeah, I've got one now. From their own side, in those very phenomena, without being posited and imputed through the force of an awareness, is a nature that's being added, superimposed on it. You see, super on it, imposed on it, imposed, added onto it. And as one time before, or a couple times before, I've indicated that Gennin Lotre gave a etymology, a folk etymology, but he was the folk who gave it, on the Tibetan word for superimposed, which is droda. The Tibetan word is droda. And it was really cute what he came up with. I've never seen anyone who came up with it. Second time I've seen that truck. We're on a private lane. Only 5 families are on the lane. Dro is feather. Da is to add on, put on. So he said, you've got a stick. See, he's talking about making an arrow. And you put feathers on the 4 sides of an arrow, on the end of an arrow. And that's the way you put a point on it. But that's how you make an arrow. Droda. And frankly, dro means feathers. So you see, you add feathers to a long pointed stick and you make an arrow. Add the feathers. You make an arrow. Now, where the etymologies don't work out in all respects, making an arrow is an effective thing. Superimposing is a negative thing. It's an exaggeration. Droda. It's cool. Really cool that he came up with this. He's the Geshe whom His Holiness, after giving tests, appointed as the most knowledgeable Geshe among those who came out from Tibet. A Gomang Geshe. Hey! It's sort of the Gomang club. But no matter how many, I've had teachers from all the so-called 4 biggies in the Lhasa area, pretty big area, except for Saramet. Four colleges, often this 4. So anyway, I got into translating the Gomang syllabus just because they asked me to. Made a point of asking me to. And got into translating bits of it. So, is a nature that is superimposed. Any advantage to saying that is superimposed over is a superimposed nature? Is it easier to say superimposed nature? Not better? Okay. And this superimposition and apprehension of such as existing is the mode of superimposing a nature. All right. Wow. Mode, way of superimposing a nature. Such a mode of subsistence of those respective phenomena, the conceived object apprehended thus by that awareness, is hypothetically identified as self. Hypothetically, because it don't exist. Or itself, it's identified as self. Do we need a comma there? It's not a choice. Or nature. What does nature mean here? Inherent existence. That's what the slash means. That's no conventional nature. That's inherent existence, the object of negation. And self here means, you see, inherent existence. That's why I say comma. Yeah, it's got to have a comma. So here in Chondakirti's, so these quotes, with the help of there's help that one gets from the first Aryadeva, Chondakirti's commentary. Sorry. The 400 says, all these are not their own power. So, where does the commentary come from? They've annotations again. All these things are not established under their own power because of being contingent on other conventions or awarenesses. Conventions we saw were words. It often goes that way. Words or awarenesses. Awarenesses, thinking. Since they are not established under their own power, you see, it's like therefore, they do not have self, established by way of their own entity. How helpful the annotations are. And, you can, after reading it, you can go back and see what it would read like without the annotations, but to not be hung up on what's annotation, what's the basic text. When you're first reading it, here in the world, that thing which is established by way of its own entity exists by way of its own being. Oh, that's what own being means. Exists by way of its own being. It's got its own being. Doesn't a beautiful sunset look like it exists by way of its own being? Established by way of its own entity. And it's just established, not contingent on others. I mean, in one way, when you think about it, it's stupid. When you think about it. But how is it seen? How is it experienced? How is it experienced? Not contingent on others. So this is where I looked it up, where I stopped and looked it up. Contingent on is pratibaddha. Prati is a prefix. Baddha is like bandha. So Buddha, believe it or not, in English is bound. So not bound to. Bound, bind. You see bind in the past participle sense, like Buddha, Buddha, the past participle. Bound to or connected to, or I chose out the ones that I thought were appropriate. Subject to, entangled with. The other Sanskrit source is Adina. Adina. Sorry, I shouldn't. I got it in my mind early on in my study of Sanskrit. I was in class for only 2 years because I was in graduate school for only 2 years in class. That long letters meant emphasis. And it was only when I was teaching in Virginia that I asked a student to ask the Sanskrit teacher, are we going too long? Oh, we are. Oh my gosh. Is there any emphasis, stress in Sanskrit? No, what is the stress? How do you handle stress in Sanskrit? You know, transportation, which we learned from kindergarten, how to put in stress in words. Like people at Shravasti say Shravasti. And word came back, there is no stress in Sanskrit. So long and short don't mean stress. So madhyamaka, there's just no stress. So adina, it's just the eye of adina is not adina, it's adina. You see, it's I or E, adina, Shravasti, just, and it's very hard for an English speaker to not put stress in. And because English is so influenced by Latin, you get on the next to last syllable called the penultimate, the next to last, Shravasti. And a dummy like me, because the Shra is long, I want to say Shravasti rather than Shravasti. You have to say 200 Shravastis every morning. Shravasti. You probably have a bunch of other things you have to say 4,000 times every morning. So sometime during the day, 200 Shravastis. And then everyone who comes there and says Shravasti, you just pound at them. Shravasti. So the other one is adina, resting on, subject to, situated with, subject to. So we stop there.